you that Ned is a passionate follower of Jesus Christ and a lover of his truth. I first met Ned early in 2012 when his then department head and jail administrator at the Renville County Jail called me to come over and work on a software project for the jail. And the first thing she wanted me to know about Ned was that he was a Jesus man. I had worked with Elaine, for the prior 15 years, mostly up in Yellow Medicine County at the Sheriff's Department, where she was a dispatcher and who had done part-time policing in my family's city. And I early learned that she was a strong Christian lady. And fun thing for me to tell you about Elaine, early on the deputies would tell me that whenever they had a person that they didn't seem to be able to reach, they would bring that person into the old jail up in Granite Falls and sit them down and have Elaine come and give them her Sunday school talk. I guess it was their way of saying, this person really needs the Lord. Well, Elaine, after a few years, was hired on by the Renville County Sheriff and was the spark plug to get the jail built there and set in motion the policies and procedures and philosophy by how that jail was run. So I would go over there to the Renville County Jail and sit in Elaine's office, and she and Ned and I would supposedly talk about software, but it seemed like whenever I would go there for the first hour at least, they would just want to tell me about what God was doing, touching lives in the jail. And the tears would just come to my eyes. I just was amazed. It was awesome to me what God was doing. And I would leave those meetings just soaring, thinking, God, how awesome you are, how amazing, what a master you are. You know how to touch every person with the truth of Jesus Christ. Well, Elaine told me, I think it was Elaine, but it sounds like Elaine anyway, that after the jail was running a while, she called up Ned because they were friends from their youth, and she said, hey, Ned, I want you to quit your job and take a pay cut and come work with me at the Renville County Jail because God is fixing to touch some lives here at the jail, and you need to be a part of it. In 2016, and I want to tell you this because I don't know if Ned will, I think he might think it's tooting his own horn, I don't know. But in 2016, there was a reporter from the Fargo-Moorhead area that was writing a story about a young man who got in trouble and landed in jail in that area. And this reporter was asking the question, well, sure, there's treatment. I forgot to tell you that it was because of a substance abuse issue. And the reporter was asking the question, well, I know there's treatment for people once they get out of jail, but are there jails that have programs in place to help these people while they're in jail? And quite generally met with the answer being negative. Part of their research was to call the Department of Corrections in St. Paul and pose this question to them. And the answer the reporter got was, well, that's not really our model. You know, our model is you do the crime, you do the time, and we hold the keys to the slammer. That last thing was my embellishment. But they said you could call Renville County because the jail there is doing some interesting things that maybe relate to what your question is. Oh, yeah. Well, I've grown up around missionaries and missions all my life, And I had developed the idea that to be a missionary, you had to go over there somewhere, across an ocean or across a border, or at least over there, wherever that was, because that's where the people were that needed the gospel, right? Boy, was I wrong. Some of the strongest missionary work that I know, and I'm choosing my words carefully, some of the strongest missionary work that I know of is happening in adjacent county, in a jail of all places. Praise God. I would like to introduce to you a former hardware store man, a former specialty building products transportation man, right? Trucker. A member of the Wilmer Free Church, a passionate follower of Jesus Christ, a keyboard and vocal musician, a missionary, a jail administrator. Ladies and gentlemen, would you help me welcome Ned Woolman?
Thank you, brother.
Love you, man.
After that introduction, I was waiting to see who was going to stand up. I wasn't nervous this morning until I found out that Dave was going to introduce me. But he is a dear brother, and it did bring to mind one question. You know that hour that you spent with Elaine and I? Were you billing us for that? Just wondering. Hi. Well, greetings. My name is Ned Woolman, and I'm the jail administrator at the Renville County Jail. And that's where I'm supposed to be. It's interesting. I think that God took me in a very indirect path to get there. From a hardware store to driving a truck to working on the floor as a corrections officer and where I am now. But it was his direct line. As I often find out and realize that what is my plan A is never God's plan A. Matter of fact, my plan Z is never God's plan A. A little bit about what I do. In 2008, Elaine did entice me to come work for her at Renville County. She's a good, solid, godly woman and my mentor. And I did that worked as a corrections officer on the floor until 2011, when I became the program director. Then in 2013, became the assistant jail administrator, and in 2015, I became the jail administrator. And it truly is where I'm supposed to be. Well, along the way in my life, I got married to my high school sweetheart, Julie, who's here today. And I often say that I know why God put her in my path, but I don't have a clue why he put me in hers. But I am grateful. She's the reason why I'm able to do what I do, why I'm able to help the people that God has given me the opportunity to help. Because she'll be the first to tell you that there are many nights that I wouldn't be home at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning yet. She knew where I was. Never doubted it. It's amazing what she's put up with for all these years. Me alone, let alone what I do. We have 2 children, Philip and Kristen. 3 grandchildren. Caitlin's 14, Connor is 8, and Alexis is 6. Grandchildren are really cool. As a matter of fact, I think if we could have gone right to grandchildren. Well, it seems that this little boy lost a puppy. Puppy died unexpectedly. He was heartbroken. So he asked his mom if she would help him make a little casket for this puppy. So they took a shoebox and they lined it specially and put the little puppy in and covered it up. And the little boy said, "I want to have a funeral for this puppy." And the mom said, I don't know really if anybody's going to do that for you, but you can try. So they talked a little bit. So he set out with his shoebox with this deceased puppy inside, started walking into town, happened to come upon the Lutheran church, went inside and asked the pastor if he would bury his puppy. And the pastor said, I'd really like to, but there's going to be puppies in heaven and all, but they don't have a soul, and I really can't do that. The boy said, "I know, my mom said that's probably what would happen." So out the door he went, and he kept walking until he came to the E-Free Church and said, "Pastor, would you bury my puppy?" The pastor said, I would love to, and there'll be puppies in heaven and everything, but puppies don't have a soul, and I really can't do that. Yeah, my mom kind of said that would happen. So he's going to head back home, but he happens to come across the Catholic Church and goes inside and comes upon the priest and said, "Would you bury my puppy?" And the priest said, I don't think I can, son. There'll be puppies in heaven and everything, but they don't have a soul, so I don't really think I can. He said, "Yeah, my mom said that would probably happen." And he turns around and starts walking away, and after a couple of steps, he turns around and he said, "So what am I supposed to do with this $100 bill that Mom gave me to give to the pastor that buried the puppy?" And the priest said, "Son, why didn't you tell me your puppy was Catholic?" One of my good friends several years ago was Father Michael O'Connor from Renville, and he would come into the store and into the shop because after his heart attack, he wasn't supposed to have a cigarette. So he'd come up to the shop to have the cigarette for the day, and then go, and he always had a story. So most of my stories are about Catholics somehow, but he's a great man. Well, as I said, I have the best job in the world. And I'm here to tell you that this is not the only setting in which you can have a ministry. Some people are called to this, and others are called to writing software and spreading the gospel, and others are called to administrate jails. And I met a lawyer earlier today who has a ministry inside of a jail. And I'm sure you all know people that help out in one capacity or another. And I commend you for that. I have the freedom to minister to those who desperately need it, and it's kind of cool because I have a captive audience. You guys could get up and leave anytime. My audience can't. There's a friend of mine from Wilmer that goes to the E-Free there that is a dear brother, and it amazes me because he can walk through the line at Walmart and look at a cashier that looks to be struggling and simply say, "Can I pray for you?" Now, that takes courage and dedication, and I'm around people that have committed serious crimes all day long, and I don't have the courage to do what he does. All I have to do is say, "Bring John to my office," and somebody brings John to my office. It's easier that way. A great deal of what we do at the Renville County Jail is Christian-based. I make no apologies for that. First of all, it works. And second of all, it's the right thing to do. I work for a very godly Christian man who happens to be the sheriff of Renville County, and basically says, "You have my blessing, you have my prayers." That takes a lot of the pressure off because I have his support. Some of our programming, like anger management, our parenting classes, we've just a ton of Bible classes, they're Christian-based. We don't force anybody to go to them. but they're attended with a high percentage of our inmates. One thing that I'm probably most excited about and proud about in a good Christian sense of the word is we have a chemical dependency treatment program inside the jail. I grew up in a house with an alcoholic father, and that has kind of fueled my passion for recovery. Nobody should have to grow up like that. And I know it's the addiction. I have the honor to meet with inmates on a one-on-one basis anytime that I want. And it's also my honor and privilege to be with them on our knees, praying in my office, and seeing the look on their face when they know that I love them, and so does Jesus Christ. What an amazing feeling that is for both of us. I still think it's more for me than it is for them. I looked Saturday at our numbers as to the number of people that we house. It's a 72-bed facility with 76 beds, but we often run a little higher than our operating capacity. We house for a lot of different jurisdictions. On Saturday, 62% of all of our inmates were boarders. And of our total number, 21% were from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We have a contract with the BOP to house federal inmates. We also house Redwood County's overflow from McLeod County. We house for the Minnesota Department of Corrections. And last month, we also housed at various times for 5 different counties for a whole myriad of reasons. Some because of our treatment program, and some because they had what we call problem children and needed them out of their facility. And we kind of pride ourselves in being able to deal with that in a loving and Christian way. And it's amazing it works. We have a totally different philosophy, and a lot of jails think that we're crazy, which tells me that we're doing it right. I don't let anybody call me sir. I don't let anybody call me by my rank. I don't let anybody call me anything but Ned. And yes, I have a badge on and a white shirt, and it looks really official and kind of scary to some people. But it doesn't take long, and they see through that, as well as the rest of our staff, because we work very, very hard to let them know that we're not any better than they are. And the day that we think we are, we need to find a different job. I think it's true to say that I don't look for perfect histories to hire people. I look for people that have been around the block a couple of times, no matter what their age is. In a lot of facilities, any kind of a past, a DWI, for example, is a deal breaker for law enforcement. It's just not going to happen if you have that. Well, I don't like that philosophy. Now, I don't recommend that on an ongoing basis, mind you, but if there's been a little bit of a past and it's been in the past, that means to me that you understand what people go through, that people aren't perfect. And when that door slams, or when you slam that door, you know what it's like to be on the other side of the door. And that makes a difference. And I think too often, people view law enforcement as somebody out to get them. Well, that's not true at our jail. We're not out to get anybody. We don't punish. The courts did that. We're there, and our philosophy is that we want to turn you out a little bit better than we found you. Because the truth of the matter is that no matter what you've committed for a crime, you're going to, at some point in time, finish your sentence. Now, we can either turn you out angry, resentful, hostile, revengeful, and they're going to be your neighbor. Or we can show them that they're loved, that there's a better way. We can show them and tell them of the good news of the saving grace of Jesus Christ and turn them out with hope, with some self-worth, with a feeling that they have a chance, that they can do better. They're going to be your neighbor. Which one do you want as your neighbor? It's a win-win. And it's what God would have us do, what God would have us all do. A couple things about the jail. Could you pull up, I think, the first? That's an award that the jail won in 2015 from the Minnesota Corrections Association. That's not corrections officers in local jails. That's probation officers, state workers for the Department of Corrections. And I didn't think it was a very big deal that we won that award until I started getting calls and emails from judges that I have never heard of before, asking about our program, about what we do for inmates, why we're different. It's the first time since that organization's inception in 1933 that it was given to an entire jail. Sometimes they would give it to a program within the jail or a small aspect within the jail. But this is the first time that it was given to an entire jail. And the bottom line is the sad part is we ought to be the rule, but we're the exception. And that makes me sad. Next one, I don't remember what the next one is, but yes. Grace Community Church in Olivia, it's the E-Free Church there. They have taken on as their ministry a Wednesday night church service. And when the Department of Corrections does our audit, they pull video and they look at programming, and they used to just absolutely freak out about this. And they've seen that we've had 0 incidents since this has been happening. What we do is the worship team from Grace comes in on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. And they sing very similar to what you did here this morning, those kinds of songs. And then they have a message. And then communion. And then afterwards, we break up into prayer groups. And the members will pray in small groups with different individuals. And as the weeks go on and people are there for that length of time, they continue to go back to some of the same people to tell them of their progress or to bring them up to date on their court cases. And as you can see, there's a lot of inmates in there. And I took that picture. I happened to be working that night. I took that picture, and I was the only corrections officer in there. We've had 0 incidents. And I think that, again, is a testament as to what God is doing and what he continues to do. You know, I have to do a little bit of recruitment here. And you can put up the next one if you would, please. There. We believe in early recruitment. And Connor is a grandpa's boy. And when you have control of the microphone and the stage, you get to put a picture like that up. He wants to be like grandpa someday. The next picture is, I want you to see a picture of my wife. And again, she truly is the reason that I'm able to do what I do. Because without her love and support, it wouldn't happen. The next picture would be fine. I first want to tell you a story about a young man named Matthew. Matthew came to stay with us on March 13th of 2013. Matthew was arrested in Bird Island at a convenience store and charged with possession of stolen property. He was driving a pickup that wasn't his. He had stolen in the cities and came out to jackpot and got lost on his way back and ended up in Renville County and was arrested then in Bird Island. He slept for about the first week, it seemed, which is a pretty good sign of withdrawal at that point. And although he wasn't there on a drug charge, I always made it a point to kind of walk around by our general population pods, there's 6 of them, and just kind of people watch a little bit. And there was something about Matthew. It was as though he had a sign written on his forehead that said, "Help me." So I called him into my office and I said, "Hey, Matt, what's going on?" And this young man with tears in his eyes said, "I'm a methamphetamine addict. And if I don't stop, I'm going to die. I can't stop, and I don't want to die." I asked Matthew if he was ready to get some help. And he said he was. And he had this sincerity about him. I mean, a lot of people say they want to get help, but when push comes to shove, they really don't because they're not ready. Matthew was ready. And I call him Matthew because I only know him from, in essence, sobriety on forward. Whenever we talk about his past, we call that Matt. I don't know Matt. I don't want to know Matt from what I hear. So, if you ask Matthew what his aha moment would be, I believe the date was the 21st of that same month at about 11 p.m. I happened to be working late that night, and as I walked out, I looked in the window into the laundry room, and Matthew was doing laundry in there by himself. So I just stopped in. "How's it going?" We started talking, and after a while I said, so what happened? Why the drugs? What happened in your life? Matthew said that one night his girlfriend that he was living with just got up and left, and he found out later that she had left to have an abortion. He said, "That was devastating to me." He said, "I just couldn't take it." And then he said, "I'm still angry at her, and I will never, ever forgive her as long as I live." So we went on with the conversation, and a little bit later I said, "Matthew, do you ever pray the Lord's Prayer?" And he said, "Yes, every night." I said, "Stop immediately. Don't say it again." And as he questioned me why, I said, "Well, let's say it together, one line at a time. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." I said, "Matthew, you are asking God, you're demanding of God to forgive you the exact same way that you're forgiving your ex-girlfriend." It was like you could see the blood drain from his head. With that, I walked over and gave him a hug, and I left. An hour later, I got a text from the corrections officer that was on duty and said, "What did you do to Mallory?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "He's alone in the laundry room on his knees, and praying. Well, Matthew was allowed to do our inpatient program pre-trial. So while he was waiting for the legal process to continue, the judge said, go ahead, you can do the program. He qualified for funding, and he started the program. He finished it and did very, very well. Matthew was very serious and made quite an impression on me. He had charges in other counties, and I agreed to personally mentor him. And we use the word mentor kind of haphazardly, but let me tell you this, and my wife will attest to this. When you mentor somebody, it's all or nothing. It's exhausting. It takes time, energy, and resources to do that. All of which God has blessed us with. And they're His to start with. So I'm just simply using what's His and He gave me to care for, to keep track of, to help people with. So Matthew had felony cases in Stearns, Anoka, Hennepin, Renville, and I think Isanti, although I can't remember the last one. And I agreed to go with him to his court hearings. When he was done with Renville County, he had to go to Anoka next. So they had a warrant for him. They came and picked him up. And when I got to the courthouse for that particular hearing, that was, by the way, he was going to answer on 7 felony charges that particular day, which pretty much meant he's going to prison. When I walked into the courtroom, his public defender got my attention and motioned for me to come over there. And I followed him, and we went into this little room, and I expected Matthew to be there, but it was the prosecuting attorney. And he held up my letter, and he said, "Are you serious? Would you really do this?" He said, "I'm absolutely serious. That's why I'm here today." Okay. That's all he said. So I went back to the courtroom, and a little bit later, the prosecuting attorney is trying to get my attention. So I follow him, and I ended up in the chambers of Judge Nancy Logring. She held up that letter and said, "Are you serious about doing this?" I said, "I'm absolutely serious. That's why I'm here." She said, "Tell me about the program." So I did. And as my wife can attest, I tend to go on and on about it because I'm excited about it. I like what we do for people in His name. And this is just the first of many, many times that God had His hand in this whole thing. Because she said, "You know, if you were from a metro county, you wouldn't even be sitting in my chambers." He'd obviously be in prison. He said, "I know you folks out there." But that was interesting. She said, "You don't realize this, but before your time, I was the Renville Assistant County Attorney for 2 years. What are the odds?" Matthew had served already that year about 144 days. He pled guilty to all 7 felony charges. And when he stood in front of Judge Logring, she accepted his guilty plea on the first felony and sentenced him to 90 days, time served. Wow, that raised a few eyebrows in the courtroom. But then there were 6 more charges. On the second felony, she accepted his guilty plea and sentenced him to, it was 30 days, time served. As it turns out, by the time she got to the third one, the court reporter stopped recording, as though to say, "Have you lost your mind?" On the last felony that she accepted the guilty plea of, think there were 3 or 4 days left. So she sentenced him to those 3 or 4 days, time served. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. And that was on the recommendation of the prosecutor, that 2 years earlier would love to have put him away for life. But he'd been through treatment. He had done everything he was asked to do. And she dismissed the last 2 counts because there were no days left. She allowed him to, although he had a body-only warrant from Stearns County, which means you go right to Stearns County, she ordered him released to me that day, and that warrant should come with. She has that authority, but it's very, very rare. So he came back to Renville County, and he had a spot in Project Turnabout's halfway house in Marshall. We send a lot of people there. And he can't go there with an active body-only warrant. So I'm sitting in my office thinking, why would you bring us this far to just let it fail? And I realized I really hadn't checked on that or called, so I thought, okay, it's in your hands. Called the Stearns County attorney and boldly told him, this is what I want you to do. I want you to quash the warrant. I want you to put a court date out 120 or 140 days out into the future. And I'll make sure he's there. And it was quiet on the other end, and I was waiting for the laughter to start. And he said, God must have worked in his morning that way because he had been frustrated. And I remember what he said. He said, well, I don't get as excited as my young colleagues do around here. If he doesn't show up, you'll have a warrant, we'll have a warrant, Anoka will have a warrant. I'll walk it across the street, I'll have a judge sign it, 20 minutes, the warrant will be quashed. Wow. So we went to Marshall's halfway house. Got a job the very first day. Thank you, God. Near the end of his 3 months that he was there, his employer wanted him to stay on. He was a great employee. But when you have a felony record, it's very, very difficult to rent property or an apartment because they can do a background check to an extent, and they see the felony convictions, especially drugs. It's an automatic no. Well, he had read in I think the Marshall paper that somebody in Vesta had a house to rent. So he called me and I said, I'll come pick you up. So I drove to Marshall, picked him up, and we were going to Vesta, and I was trying to just make sure that he didn't get his hopes up and said, be honest with them, be open with them, tell them everything that you can. And it's a good experience. Don't expect the first time for this to work. So we got there, and he went with the gentleman to tour the house, and I visited with his wife. And when they got done, they said, well, we do have to show it to somebody else tonight, so we'll let you know. Well, what that really meant in my head and in Matthew's head was, thanks, but no thanks. So I dropped Matthew back at Marshall and tried to encourage him as best I could. And on my way back to Renville, I don't think I got 3 miles outside of Marshall, and the phone rang, and it was this lady. And she said, we're going to take a chance on him. And I know that with tears rolling down my cheeks, I thanked her for giving this young man a chance. And she said, it's okay, I checked you out. I said, you mean you checked Matthew out? She said, no, I checked you out. You don't know this, but your partner before you became program director was my sister. What are the odds? Thank you, God. Today, Matthew is almost 5 years clean and sober. He's full-time employed. He's a taxpayer. He's paid nearly $15,000 worth of fines and probation costs, and he has his license back. The picture in the upper left, I'm sorry, just go back. Yeah, that's Matthew today, by the way. Picture in the upper left was January 1st of 2013. 2013. This was March of 2013 to the right. And this is when he came back from Anoka just before he went to the halfway house. Same person. And then the next one, please. That's Matthew, as of about a year and a half ago, I think, actually, standing in front of our bedroom door. I'm here to tell you that you should never be afraid that someone has had a checkered past. What matters is what they're doing today. What matters is what they're doing going forward. I've got some things I just assume nobody knows about. I think we all do. I can also tell you today that Matthew's family, we don't really plan Thanksgiving or Easter unless we know where Matthew's going to be. I can tell you that I would trust him with my very last nickel and my life because he's a good man. He's also a sober man. And I'm also here to tell you today that he's my best friend. And we met in a county jail when he was withdrawing from methamphetamines. But he's a good man. Don't be afraid to take a chance on somebody that genuinely wants to try. And will you get burned? Yep, I have. I knew that the evil one was going to be tough this week, but I had no idea he was going to be that tough. It seemed that the things that normally just go so easy were difficult. A young man that I had been working with for quite some time relapsed. And that takes a little piece out of you every time. But it's worth it because of Matthew. And there are other Matthews out there that need you. Don't be afraid to take a chance. I think the next picture is one that Matthew wanted taken because he finally has his license back and he bought a vehicle. Now the picture in the upper, or the top, and you can't see the writing on there, but it says Renville County Jail public entrance. Matthew came to jail about 3.5 years before that picture in a pickup that he stole. And 3.5 years later, he's putting the license tab on his pickup and driving away. Yes, he's on probation, but he does absolutely everything that he's asked to do. And once a month, he still comes back for his probation meeting, stays with us, of course, and then spends the rest of the day after his probation meeting in the jail in the treatment program, giving back. It's kind of fun to see that happen because he's a been there, done that kind of person. He had a $350 a day methamphetamine habit and no job. Can fill in the blanks. And I can tell you that it's important for us to take the time to sit down with folks like this. Jesus sat down with tax collectors and other cast-outs. Because underneath the hurt and the pain and the sin, most of those folks were good people. They were misguided. They had lost their way. Are we willing to follow Christ's lead and to sit down with those outcasts today? I think it's something that we're commanded to do. Because it's really about whether or not we respond to what Jesus would do. After all, we all talk about being more Christ-like. I do. Sometimes I fail miserably at that. And I try to remind myself that I have to do what he wants me to do, not what I want to do. The actual title of my message today was The Greatest Verse in the Bible for Those Who Are Struggling in Life. And I think that if we were honest, and I asked how many people were struggling in their life, I think I would expect everybody's hand to go up. Mine would. I think we all struggle in one way or another. So many mornings I get up and I give everything to God. And I'm so proud of myself for that. And by 9 o'clock, I've taken back 2 or 3 things because somehow I can do them better. And I'll mess them up every time. Matthew 14, starting at verse 22. Actually, I'll read it from the one that you folks have underneath the... Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. After the feeding of the 5,000, which was probably closer to 15,000 because they only counted the men in that number, that took place on the shores of the Sea of Galilee near Bethsaida. And to get to Capernaum, where they were going, was about 5 miles across the sea. And they were about 3.5 or 4 miles out. So the wind was quite strong, and it's 300 feet or so, no, 650 feet, below sea level, and it's 150 feet deep. And it has hills all the way around it, which create the conditions for storms that pop up. And the waves can be very violent, and that's exactly what happened. And it says, on the 4th watch, which is somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., he came to them walking on the sea. I can only imagine what I would have thought had I seen somebody walking on the water at 3 in the morning with a violent storm going on. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. And they said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you in the water." Now, I got to tell you, in case you haven't figured it out, Peter has ADHD. Because no one is going to get out of the boat in the middle of a storm unless you have ADHD. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out to the Lord, "Save me." I realize that there's a lot of symbolism in the fact that, we have to get our help from Jesus, and as long as we're thinking towards Jesus, we're going to be okay. But this story really happened. This isn't a parable. So I think what's important is exactly what happened. I believe that as long as Peter had his eyes fixed on Jesus, his mind, his soul, his very being fixed on Jesus, he defied human nature, or nature, I should say, natural law. He walked on the water, not because Jesus was holding him up by a miracle, but because he had his entire being fixed on Jesus. Then it goes on to say that when he realized that there was a storm around him, when the world distracted him, when he no longer was totally fixed on Jesus Christ, he began to sink. He started to have to adhere to natural law. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Now, the next verse is the most important verse in that entire Bible that you need to remember when you're struggling in life. And it's as important to remember what verse doesn't say as to what it does say. It doesn't say Jesus chewed him out, admonished him severely, and then held out his hand. It doesn't say that he let him sink a few times and bring him back up to punish him, and then hold out his hand. It doesn't say that Jesus said, "Well, why don't you swim halfway and I'll meet you halfway?" What it does say is immediately, Jesus held out his hand and grabbed on. You don't have to wait. No matter what has happened in your past, no matter what you've done, or what you haven't done, or what you wished you would have done. There's nobody in the room sinless. I'm in front of that line that's not. Anytime, anywhere, for any reason, hold out your hand. And we have it in writing. And it's God's letter to us, so we know it's true. We profess that the Bible is the holy, inerrant, inspired Word of God. And it's our guide for life. Hold out your hand, and he will grab it. He never leaves you. We might ignore him, but he never leaves you. I take great comfort in knowing that although I am a miserable sinner, I'm saved by grace through faith in Christ Jesus. Isn't that what it's all about? Reach out. He'll take your hand. He died for you, and he died for me. Life's full of challenges. I would encourage you to help those who are struggling. Dave, you're right, you don't have to go far. My grandmother used to say, you don't have to go far from home to find that somebody's got it worse than you do. There are hurting people right outside the door. That's the mission field. And what you do for supporting missions is great, and please don't stop it, but don't be afraid to take a chance on somebody that desperately needs your help. God has given me that opportunity. It's humbling, but it's wonderful. Would you please pray with me? Heavenly Father, you are such a great and mighty God. It's only through your will that we succeed. Remind us always that we need to spread the gospel in whatever we do, whether it's simply in school with our friends. Let them see through these folks, through these kids, their love of Christ.
because people will know our God by how we live our life. And although we will fall short, you sent your Son so that on that day, that last day, as our offenses are read, Jesus will say, Father, I have paid for that in full. In full. With my blood. And it is sufficient. Father, help us to reach out and take the hand that Jesus is offering us. Thank you for sending him, for sending your one and only Son. You love us so much that he gave his life for us so that someday our sins will be judged whiter than snow. That is truly amazing grace.